Hello and good day. We are from the Seng 3.0 group. Today I will be introducing our research titled Microeconomic Determinants of Inflation, a cross-country econometric analysis. Inflation is a central concern in economic policy as it directly affects the cost of living, purchasing power, and macroeconomic stability. Our study uses consumer price index as a proxy for inflation and investigates how it is influenced by three key microeconomic variables: the gross domestic product (GDP), money supply, and household consumption. The motivation for this study comes from the need to better understand the combined effects of these variables, especially in a cross-country context. While many studies analyze inflation determinants using time series data within individual countries, few studies adopt a cross-sectional approach across multiple countries at a single point in time, like we have. By analyzing data from various countries for the year 2022, our study seeks to identify which of these variables has the most significant impact on inflation and what that implies for policy. The findings are intended to provide evidence that supports more targeted and country-specific inflation control strategies.
Next, moving on to the problem statement part of our study, our first problem statement is that CPI inflation affects purchasing power, policy, and income inequality. Inflation reduces the real value of money, making it harder for households, especially low-income groups, to maintain their standard of living. It also influences key policy decisions and can widen the gap between the rich and the poor if left unchecked. Our second problem statement is that most studies analyze GDP, money supply, and household consumption individually and not together. While existing literature recognizes these variables as drivers of inflation, many studies examine their effects in isolation. This makes it difficult to understand their combined impact on CPI, which is more realistic in policy-making scenarios. Our third problem statement is the lack of global studies using cross-country data in a single time frame. Many inflation studies are either country-specific or time series based. There is a shortage of cross-sectional studies that compare multiple countries at one point in time, thus limiting the broader policy applications and international comparisons. Moving on to the objectives part of our study, our first objective is to examine the CPI's relationship with GDP, money supply, and household consumption. This objective aims to explore how three core macroeconomic variables influence inflation, thus providing a holistic view rather than examining them separately. Our second objective is to determine the strength and direction of these effects. This involves assessing whether each variable has a positive or negative relationship with CPI and how significant that relationship is. Understanding this helps in prioritizing policy actions. And last but not least, our third objective is support effective inflation-related policy making. By identifying the key contributors to inflation, the findings can guide central banks and governments in tailoring their monetary and fiscal policies to address the most influential factors in controlling CPI inflation.
For hypothesis and scope, in our studies, we developed the three main hypotheses based on the economic theories. Firstly, the GDP has a positive effect on the CPI. This means that when a country GDP increases, we expect the inflation to rise due to a higher demand. Second, money supply have the positive effect on CPI. This follows the idea that the more money in the economy can lead to the higher price. Lastly, household consumptions have the positive effect on CPI. That means when the people spend more, demand will increase and the price may go up. As per the scope in our study, we used data for year 2022, and the data covered the multiple countries and allowing us to compare across different economies. And we also applied the ordinary least squared OLS regressions model to estimate the relationship between the variables. All the data taken from the World Bank, which is that was a trusted and reliable resources. Empirical gap and contributions. Many past studies on inflation have some limitations. First, most of them use a single country data or time series data that focus on one country over the times. Second, only a few studies have looked at the combination effect on GDP, money supplies, and the household consumptions on CPI across the different countries. Third, some studies are not include a proper model testing, which can affect a reliability of their results. So in our studies, we try to address this gap by making the following contributions. We use a cross-sectional database from multiple countries for the year 2022. We also include a demand-side factor like GDP and consumptions and monetary factor like money supply in one model. Our result may help to create a better policy to control inflations. And lastly, we also apply a model testing to ensure that our findings are accurate and valid, which help to improve the overall quality of inflation research.
For the methodology of review, the model we decided to use is CPI equal to BO plus B1 GDP plus B2 money supply plus B3 household consumption plus E. This is a multiple linear regression model where CPI, which is the consumer price index, is the dependent variable, while GDP, money supply, and household consumption are the independent variables that are used to explain the variations in inflation. The E term captures other factors that are not included in the model. For the data, we reduce the data from the World Bank, where the dataset includes cross-sectional data from multiple countries for the year 2022. The World Bank was chosen as the source due to its reliability and comprehensive coverage of international economic indicators. For the software, we would use eViews 12, where this software was used to run the regression analysis and perform diagnostic tests. The software is well suited for econometric modeling and is widely used in academic and professional settings. For the method, we would run the OLS regression with diagnostic test. Ordinary least square OLS regression was used to estimate the model. OLS minimizes the sum of squared residuals and provides unbiased and efficient estimators, assuming the classical regression assumptions are whole.
So now we go to the descriptive statistics. So for CPI, the mean is 173.9128, which is the average CPI in the sample. The median is 145.5915. The standard deviation is 85.9929. For GDP, the mean is 458 billion, the average, which is the average GDP in the sample. Median is 49.4 billion, which is much lower than the mean, which indicates a positive skew. The standard deviation is 1.9 trillion. Significant variability in GDP values suggests a broad range of values. Now we go to money supply. The mean is 793 billion. The median is 23.8 billion, lower than the mean, which also shows a positive skew. The standard deviation is 4.2 trillion, which shows a big variability in the money supply. Now we go to household consumption, which is the mean is 223 billion. The median is 27.8 billion, which is much lower than the mean, also showing a positive skew. The standard deviation is 750 billion, significant spread of data points from the mean. Okay, so now we go to the Pearson correlation test. So Pearson's correlation measures the strength and direction of a linear relationship between variables, ranging from -1 to 1. If it's a negative value, it shows that it has a negative relationship, while if it's a positive value, it shows that it has a positive relationship. So the correlation between CPI and GDP is a weak negative relationship, as the value is -0.0838. For CPI and money supply, the correlation is -0.0912. It also shows the weak negative relationship. For CPI and household consumption, the correlation is -0.0820. It also shows a weak negative relationship. For GDP and money supply, the correlation is 0.9901, which is a strong positive relationship. For GDP and household consumption, the correlation is 0.9875. It also shows a strong positive relationship. For money supply and household consumption, the correlation is 0.9770. It shows a strong positive relationship. So in conclusion, CPI has a weak negative relationship with other variables. However, the GDP, money supply, and household consumption are strongly positively correlated, especially GDP and money supply. All right, so now we go to the JB test. For the JB test, it tests if residuals follow a normal distribution. All right, so in our analysis, the skewness is 1.6. It shows a right skew, and the JB statistic is 86.52542, and the p-value is 0.00. It indicates that it has a non-normal distribution. All right, so for the model validity, normality of residuals is not required in OLS in large sample sizes. The central limit theorem ensures that OLS estimators approach normality with a large sample size. Gauss-Markov ensures that the OLS estimators remain blue if key assumptions are met. So in conclusion, despite non-normal residuals, the large sample size and robustness of the OLS ensures the model's reliability. Okay, so now we go to the Durbin-Watson test. So the purpose of this test is to detect autocorrelation in residuals of a regression model. It ranges from 0 to 4. So if the value is of 2, that means there's no autocorrelation. If it's below 2, that means there is a positive autocorrelation. If it's above 2, that means there's a negative autocorrelation. So in our statistic, in our test, we have done our Durbin-Watson test, and it shows a value of 2.0891. So this value is only slightly above 2. That means there's no significant autocorrelation in the residuals. So in conclusion, assumptions of the regression model is likely intact. There's no concerns about autocorrelation, and the model appears appropriate with no violation of regression assumptions. Okay, so now we go to the Bruch-Pagan-Goffray test. This test detects heteroscedasticity, which is a non-constant variance in residuals. So in our test, we have formulated two hypotheses, which is a null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis says that the residuals have constant variance. That means it has homoscedasticity. The alternative hypothesis is that the residuals have a non-constant variance, which is heteroscedasticity. So based on all the p-value, the F statistic value, the p-value, the scale explained SS value, all of this shows no significant evidence of heteroscedasticity. Therefore, in conclusion, the high p-values in all test statistics indicates that there is no evidence of heteroscedasticity. So the high p-values supports the assumption of homoscedasticity. So next we go to the Ramsey test. So the Ramsey test checks for omitted variables or incorrect functional form in the regression model. So in the F statistic here, we got a value of 0.1224. The p-value is 0.7274. Because of the high p-value, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. There is no evidence of model misspecification or omitted variables. For the t statistic, we got a value of 0.3499 and a p-value of 0.7274. This value supports that there is no misspecification, no specification errors. For the likelihood ratio statistic, we have a value of 0.1305. The p-value is 0.7179. This value shows that there's no significant improvement from adding the squared fitted values. So in conclusion, there is no strong evidence against model misspecification or omitted variable bias. So therefore, it supports the assumption of an appropriately specified model.
Now let's move on to the discussion of our findings. From our OLS regression, we found out that all three variables, the GDP, money supply, and household consumption, have a positive and statistically significant effect on CPI. Let's break it down. Firstly, the GDP. The positive coefficient indicates that as economic output increases, inflation also tends to rise, in line with the demand pull inflation theory. However, interestingly, the Pearson correlation between GDP and CPI was weakly negative. This suggests a complex relationship where income growth does not always result in inflation, possibly due to structural and productivity differences across countries. As of money supply, as expected from classical monetary theory, an increase in the money supply significantly raises the CPI. However, once again, the Pearson correlation was slightly negative. This contrast highlights that money supply's impact may depend on monetary policy settings, transmission mechanism, and time lags. Thirdly, household consumption. Similarly, it shows a significant positive relationship with CPI in the regression. The economic logic is that greater consumption raises aggregate demand, thus pushing price upward. However, the Pearson correlation again shows a weak negative relationship. This contrast emphasizes the importance of controlling for other variables when interpreting simple correlations. Regarding the diagnostic test we ran, the Durbin-Watson test showed no autocorrelation in residuals. The Brooke-Pagan-Godfrey test indicated no heteroscedasticity. The Ramsey reset test confirmed correct model specification. However, for the JB test, it failed the normality check, likely due to outliers or cross-country variation. Nevertheless, this does not invalidate the model due to robustness of OLS in the large sample. These findings confirm the multifaceted nature of inflation, driven by both real and monetary factors, and underline the need for nuanced policy responses. To conclude, our research confirms that GDP, money supply, and household consumption all significantly influence inflation across countries, even if simple correlations suggest otherwise. These results are aligned with established macroeconomic theories and support the use of cross-country econometric models to understand global inflation patterns. Now, onto our policy recommendations. Firstly, enhance monetary control. Since money supply significantly affects inflation in our regression, central banks must implement stricter oversight, particularly in developing economies. Tools like inflation targeting and open market operations should be actively utilized. Next, adopt country specific inflation strategies. Our results show that uniform policies are unlikely to be effective across all countries. Instead, each country should tailor its inflation policy based on its institutional quality, fiscal discipline, and market structures. Thirdly, moderate household consumption during inflation spikes. Since household spending drives inflation, governments can introduce temporary consumption taxes, cash transfers to vulnerable groups, or tighten subsidies during periods of high demand, such as pandemics or festivals. Lastly, improve supply side capacity. Inflation isn't just demand driven, it is also results from supply constraints. Thus, governments should invest in infrastructure, manufacturing, logistics, and SMEs to expand productive capacity and make the economy more resilient. So, we have been the Housing 3.0 group. Thank you for watching.